Welcome to the Max Costing Training Session. I'm your Exact Americas trainer, Vince Stefanetti. In this session, we're going to show you how easy it is to start implementing costing in Max. Now, we're going to cover all the basics and as well get into more detail as we move along. Don't be worried if you know little or nothing about the module. We're going to start at the beginning and explain everything. It is important to know that you have a complete set of documentation in PDF format installed with your Max system. You also have an online portal that contains a knowledge base and many other resources. You can gain access to the portal by navigating to https://customers.exact.com. If you do not yet have access to the portal, be sure to contact your account manager so that you can get a username and password. Okay, so let's take a look at what we're going to learn in this session. We're going to go over Max cost configuration, developing standard costs, what the components of costing are, what the costing procedures are. We're going to cover subcontract, multiple cost, cover all the variances that get created in Max, how to do journal entries, the overall business flow, and month-end procedures. Now, here are our objectives. Now, we want to make sure that you gain an understanding of all the cost components of Max, how to do product costing, and so on. We need to define the methodology for developing your internal costing procedures. We need to develop and maintain setup requirements for the financial integration module. We need to review the Max financial transactions and their impact on your general ledger. We need to learn how to process vouchers, invoices, and GL transactions, and how to post them to your accounting system. We also need to review the month-end procedures and go over user security as well. The first thing we're going to do is take a bird's eye view of the overall flow of information for costing. You can see on the left-hand column, Max financial integration in your accounting system. The other parts of the diagram here show sales, inventory, and purchasing and their associated flows, finally and ending in posting to the general ledger in your accounting system. Now, the first thing you need to do when setting up costing in Max is to establish system-level parameters. That is done through the System Manager system configuration from the Activity menu, which provides you with the configuration editor. If you click on Costing, you'll see the various components and parameters that are needed to be configured in order to set up costing in Max. Now, the keys that need to be configured are alternate BOM and routing, cost set, costing method, labor burden, labor rate, material burden, your Max batch number, the pseudo net switch, routing code, and setup code. Alright, now we've logged into Max. We'll click on Activity, System Configuration, and click on Costing. You can see all the switch settings are right here. Double-clicking on an item allows you to edit the configuration. You'll see the name of the configuration item, the data type, and what the expected range is. Those are the values that you can actually enter in for this. Now, for alternate BOM and routing, which is a new feature provided in the current release of Max 5.5, this specifies whether you're going to use a particular alternate BOM or the default one. If you specify no, what will happen, it'll use the standard bill of material in the alternate rather than a specified alternate. If you do want to use an alternate, you can specify them here for both the bill of material and for the routing. For our example here, we're going to select no for both of them and use the standard. Now, let's quickly go through the remaining cost configuration items, then we'll pop into Max and take a look at these switches. So, cost set. Max contains a multiple cost module which allows you to actually maintain not only the base cost set of 00, but an additional 8 user-definable sets. Now, these sets can be used to store quarterly and annual historical cost, moving average costs, simulations, and budgets. Max supports 3 different kinds of cost method: standard costing, average costing, and last purchase price. Now, standard costing is the fixed budget costing, fixed material cost, labor rates, and overhead rates, and then Max produces variances from the standard. Average costing is a dynamic costing method where you have a dynamic material cost, fixed labor rates, and fixed overhead rates. You can see below the calculation, and that equals the new material cost. Next is last purchase price costing. This is another dynamic costing method where you have a dynamic material cost, fixed labor rates, and fixed overhead rates. So the purchase order cost then equals the new material cost. In this diagram you can see the costing method, S for standard, A for average, and P for last purchase price, and the resultant new cost after the calculation has been performed. The next item in configuration is the labor burden. This is the system level labor overhead rate, and it's entered as a percentage. If you're using the routing and setup codes, which we'll cover shortly here, then the labor burden is actually rolled up through the work center. This is the default labor rate. This is the system level labor rate. Now if you're calculating labor through the routings, then there'll be a different calculation depending on what you have set at the work centers and routings. Likewise, the material burden. This is the system level material overhead rate. Now if you're using standard costing, then you enter the material burden as a percentage. This overhead will be applied to every part unless overridden in maintain cost data, and that's in the bill of materials module, part master, accounting tab. The max batch number is the next batch number that is assigned to a batch that goes to Great Plains or your accounting system. You can change the number here if you like. Now the setup code. Now if you're using the parts routing to determine the number of labor hours, you can also specify whether you want the setup times associated with your routings to be considered. A no response prompts recalculate cost rollup not to use the setup times as part of the total labor required. If you respond yes, then it will include them. Now if you want pseudo parts costed, you must answer yes to this prompt and the routing code prompt above. A no response also excludes the cost of setup. Now on the routing code, Max can allow you to use the parts routings to calculate labor, or use a pre-established number of labor hours. A no response indicates that you do not wish to use the parts routing. Yes indicates that you do want to use the part routing to roll up labor. Now for pseudo parts, if the part type is S, are only costed if you respond yes to this prompt and yes to the setup code. The part must have a routing. Okay, so let's review these one more time. So you can see here that we're in the configuration editor, which we navigated to through the system manager from the activity menu. So you have the cost the current alternate BOM. We have that set to no because we want to use just the default. Now if we have specified an alternate BOM or an alternate routing and had this set to yes, then it will use the one specified. We're specifying here to use cost set 00. Our costing method is standard. Our next batch number is specified here. Our system default labor burden rate is 200%. Our default labor rate is 12. We have no material burden. We're not costing pseudos, but we are actually rolling up the labor through the routing by specifying yes to each of these prompts. If we didn't want to use setup as part of that, we would set that to no. Now this last item here, stock revaluation, this is a special switch that will create a transaction type in Max to actually evaluate changes to standard cost if they are performed in the system. It is suggested that you review the documentation thoroughly to see if this transaction that Max will create is appropriate for your business. Okay, now let's take a quick look at how you might assign responsibility for costing in Max. You can see at the very top here we have product costing. Manufacturing engineering would maintain the part master, maintain product structures, maintain the work centers, and maintain the routings. Purchasing would define purchase costs. Accounting would maintain the labor rates, maintain the overhead rates, perform the cost roll-ups, and audit product costs. Okay, now let's look at the various components of costing. The first one is the part type code. Next is a cost type code. The cost unit of measure, yields, product structures, low-level codes, scrap, work centers, and part routings. Now each of these are maintained in different parts of MAX, and we'll go through and we'll show you all of these. Now part type codes for manufactured parts and for purchase parts. Now manufactured parts have part type codes of M, master scheduled, A, MRP planned manufactured, S, pseudo, C, reorder point assembly, X, bulk assembly, and O, subcontracted. These are generally automatically costed, have a cost type of A, automatic, and the cost is calculated during the cost roll. For purchase parts, which are B, MRP purchased, D, reorder point purchased, Y, bulk issued purchased, are manually costed, have a cost type code of M, and the costs are entered by the user. Now there are other kinds of part type codes that are not in general use, but you may use them. T is tool, F is family, these are configured parts, R resource, and P phantom. Now let's take a little bit more detail of let's take a look at a little bit more detail on these cost type codes. Now M is manual. This means that it's user maintained, and these are generally used for all the purchase part types. A is automatic, which is system maintained, which means the cost roll actually rolls the cost from the lower levels and automatically costs these parts. We'll log into Bill of Materials module. We'll select the part master, and then we'll click on the accounting tab. Now you can see here the cost type code. By default it's manual, or moves to automatic for an A part type. We'll double click here, select a master scheduled part, and you can see it defaults to automatic. Now if we're adding a B part type, and we click over on the accounting tab, you'll see it defaults to manual. It allows you to enter in the material cost here. Now let's take a look at the cost unit of measure, bill of materials unit of measure, and the cost conversion factor. So there's two units of measure in MAX. The bill of materials unit of measure, which is how parts are built and stocked, and then the cost unit of measure, which is how the unit is purchased. The cost conversion factor converts cost unit of measure parts to bill of materials units. As you can see in this diagram here, we have a bill of material units of inches, cost unit of measure in feet, which means that we buy it in feet and we stock it in inches. Below that we have ounces to pounds, each to kilograms, and dozens to each. The conversion factor is specified on the Accounting tab in the Bill of Materials module. You specify it here under Cost Conversion Factor. So if we buy this unit, say in feet, and we stock it in inches, we would put 12 here. However, we enter the material cost in what we purchase it in. So say we buy it $10 a foot, we put in $10. It is manually costed. We'll go ahead and click Add. So when you're setting up MAX, it's very important to determine what you buy it in and what you actually stock it in, and that you specify a cost conversion factor. Okay, now let's take a look at yield and scrap. So yield is a factor used in the part master file to increase the gross requirements of a particular part to compensate for expected loss. Now this affects costing as well. The material cost is divided by the yield factor, which provides the new cost per unit for that part. Also, the order quantity equals the quantity required divided by the yield. Here's a sample product structure of a personal computer. These have low-level codes associated with them. The low-level code is the number associated with the particular level that that part has in the product structure. Now, scrap is a factor used in the product structure file to increase the gross requirements of a particular component to compensate for expected loss. Now, the cost per unit is affected by this. The material cost is divided by 1 minus the scrap percent, which equals the cost per assembly. Again, the order quantity is increased as well. The quantity required is divided by 1 minus the scrap percent. Let's take a look at the yield and scrap results. So on our system units, the total cost equals 105.26 and has a yield percent of 90%. The cost per unit is 105.26 divided by 0.90, which equals $116.96. Likewise, you can see how the scrap is affected below on the cost per unit as well. Okay, so now let's take a look at the work centers. So a work center is one or more people or machines which can be considered as one unit for the purpose of detailed scheduling or costing. A work center can be anything you want it to be: a person, two people, a machine, a room, a building, a subcontractor, and so on. Now you specify an overhead rate as a percentage expressed in terms of the labor rate. The labor rate is the average rate earned in this work center. That is entered in the shop floor execution module under Activity, Work Center. In Max, we click on the Production tab in the System Manager and select Shop Floor Execution. We click on Activity and go to Work Center. As you can see here, you specify an overhead rate and a labor rate, utilization, and available hours. Let's review one that we have in here already. You can see here that we've specified the critical information to enable costing to be affected by these rates. Now remember as well that in the System Manager under Activity System Configuration, in order for this information to be applied to costing, you need to set the routing and setup codes accordingly. Now the part routing is the other important part of rolling costs through the work centers and routings. The routing itself defines the sequence of operations for manufacturing a product. It defines the labor standards, time, and cost. And it has a relationship to the bill of materials. The BOM tracks inventory transactions. The routing tracks labor transactions. Returning to the shop floor execution module, we'll close Work Center. We'll click on Activity, Routing. We'll select a part. And you can see here, we would specify runtime and setup time. And configure the routing accordingly using all these various configuration items. And then this would be applied to our cost rollup. Again, you need to make sure that in System Manager under Configuration Editor that you set the routing and setup codes accordingly. Now what exactly is our costing procedure then? Well, we have the objective to establish a cost per unit for parts. That's achieved by using the cost rollup batch process, which calculates cost for each part in the system. It calculates the cost by beginning at the bottom of the product tree and accumulating cost at each level by low-level code of that entire tree and rolling up the bills of materials and the part routing if the cost type code is set to automatic. You can also use the option to develop costs for just one assembly, exploded or imploded. An implosion will take the input part identifier and recalculate a cost for every single level parent that uses that part. An explosion recalculates all of the components and routings, multi-level, used in the production of the input part. The cost per unit is used for all inventory transactions thereafter. So in our procedure here, what are we really doing? We're maintaining the material cost for the purchase parts. We're maintaining the bill of materials, the entire product tree. We maintain the work centers and the parts routings to get the labor cost. Then what we do is we recalculate low-level codes and recalculate the cost roll-ups. We then review the results and modify them as required. You recalculate low-level codes in the Bills of Materials module in the Batch menu. So from System Manager, click Bills of Materials, select Batch, recalculate low-level codes. You recalculate cost roll-ups in the Costing module. From the System Manager, click on the Finance tab. Click Costing. Select Batch, recalculate cost roll-ups. Now there are several options in the Recalculate Cost Roll-ups program. The All Parts After will recalculate all parts created on or after the date entered. Save options. You can choose whether to perform the recalculation and generate a report without saving the new cost. Save the cost to the part master, and/or if you have the multiple cost module, the cost may be saved to a selected cost set. Source defaults to cost set 00, which is the part master or live cost set. This may be saved to an alternate cost set for simulation purposes. On labor info, if you use the multiple cost module, if you choose a source cost set other than the part master, you may also choose the source of the labor rate, either the work center master or one of the cost set labor rates in the labor rate table. That's in multiple cost. Report options specify if you want to create a report and whether the report should be sorted by low-level code sequence or part ID sequence. The roll-up type, either an explosion or implosion as we covered earlier. Now once you've completed the cost roll, you're going to want to review your results. That is best done using two reports, the costed multi-level explosion report. This is a good starting point. And next, for more detailed error elimination, use the Recalculate Cost Rollups report. Now a quick comment here on those that may have the subcontracting module on the bill of material method. Now a part number that is sent out for subcontracting must be a part type code of O and have a cost type of A automatic. The material that is supplied to the subcontract vendor must be a component on the subcontract parts bill of material. The subcontracting cost is entered in the part master under subcontract cost. That's under the accounting tab. Now this cost will be rolled up during the Recalculate Cost Rollup program. Now if you're using vendor supplied material, when you create your bills of materials, make sure that you specify the BOM type code of E, because you don't want the system to create requirements for those vendor supplied parts. You can see in this diagram here under the accounting tab you enter in the subcontract cost for the part. Okay, now let's take a look at the multiple cost functionality. So multiple cost expands the number of potential cost fields from 1 to 9 for each part. Part master cost set is 00, which is the default unless you change that. And then you have multiple cost sets, 01 through 8, which are user defined. So this provides more cost data for evaluation of current, past, and future standards. It also allows you to do what-if analysis. Now for the multiple cost module, you have some setup things that you may need to do and some utilities to utilize this functionality. You go to Maintain Cost Set Data to maintain cost sets. You can maintain the labor rate table to run simulations and apply different labor rates. You can copy and clear cost set data. And of course you have recalculate cost set rollups in order to roll up the costs in the various cost sets. And then you can view the cost set data. Now maintain cost set is performed in the System Manager under System Configuration in the Configuration Editor. You maintain the labor rate table under Costing, Activity, Labor Rate. In our slide here, you can see you specify the Work Center ID and then the various labor rates and labor overheads. You can copy and clear cost set information by going to Costing, Batch, Copy, Clear Cost Sets. You can use the Recalculate Cost Set Rollups program to apply the different functionality that you saw prior to any given cost set or even the live cost set. You can view cost set data by going to Costing, Activity, Cost Set Data. If you specify a particular part, you can see all the costing information that applies to this particular part for each and every cost set. To have a look at these various options, simply go to the Costing module, click Activity, go to Cost Set Data. You can enter in a part here, and you can review the information for that part. The cost set date, or when the cost roll was performed, and all the specifics for each and every cost set here and their related costs. Labor rate table is under Activity, Labor Rate. The cost roll and the Copy Clear Cost Set data are located under the Batch menu. In System Manager, select Activity System Configuration, Multiple Costs to enter in the description for the cost set. And under Multiple Cost Sets, you can number them here. Now let's take a look at the different variances. First is Purchase Price Variance. That's the invoice price minus the unit standard cost. The Material Variance is the actual material issued plus the cost of any X and Y bulk issue parts minus the standard material cost. The Labor Variance is the actual hours and labor rate minus the standard labor times the labor rate. The Labor Overhead Variance is the actual labor overhead minus the standard overhead. For Purchase Price Variance analysis, you can navigate to the Costing module, select Reports, and go to Purchase Part. Now you can run this report, and you could specify a minimum variance value or a percent to give you a result to show you the variances. What the report will show you is the order numbers, the vendors, the quantity received, the total PO cost, the total standard cost, what the total variance is, and what the percentage is. This also helps in identifying incorrect standard costs. For Material and Labor Variance, go to Costing, Batch, Post-Order Closure. In Post-Order Closure, you can actually double-click on the order number in the screen to look at the Material Variance and the Labor Variance. Now to track this down even further, what you can do is you can go into the shop order and you can review the order bill of material. You could look at shortages and the issue quantities and so on to see why there might be a variance. Now there's two possible reasons on this. One is that the output was higher than expected, might be due to yield and scrap. The second would be that the standard cost of the material has been reduced. Is this correct, or is there an additional factor? Well, if no cost roll-up was performed after the change in the component standard cost, then you may have your answer right there. Now let's look at a little bit more detail at the post-order closure. So what this is a process to close out manufactured and master scheduled orders that have been completed, which are status 4, completed, and move them to status 5, which is closed. At that time, what occurs is that the material and labor variances for the order are posted to the transaction history file for posting to the general ledger. Now, this process must be completed if you're going to capture these variances. Post-order closure is available through the costing module under Batch, Post-order closure. If you double-click on the order number, you can review the variances. Another tool that you can use is the order cost inquiry, which is also available in costing. What this inquiry will do is show you a detailed analysis of all the different material, labor, subcontract, and the grand totals for the actual standard and variances. Now, the post-order closure grid allows you to investigate the variances and correct errors. You can double-click the order number to get a quick look at the material and labor variances, but you can also click on the part, which will get you the detailed inquiry to show you exactly what happened with this order. To close the orders out, simply check the checkbox under the Close column and select a Close Order. You can select multiple at a time as well. Now, we'll quickly mention here the journal entries, although they're not used very much. You can use a journal entry to transfer amounts between general ledger accounts and MAX. Account numbers must have been previously created as a default, a cross-reference account, or an override account. Now, the record is saved in the general ledger work file for GL posting as a transaction type of J. However, there is no transaction history record for journal entries. To perform this function, you would go to the costing module under journal entry. You would enter in the account and the target accounts and then process the transaction. Now, the next thing that needs to be understood is the use of account type codes. This is a single character code that is associated with a part. That's maintained in Part Master in the Bills of Materials under the Accounting tab. It typically denotes a product line, and what it does is it translates MAX operational transactions into distributed financial transactions. Some examples of account type codes would be computers for C, replacement parts R, servers S, and boards B. You can code these however you like, but the idea is what is happening here is it's creating a separate chart of accounts based on a specific kind of product line and gives you distributed accounts. To establish your account type codes, go to the Financial Integration module, select Activity, Account Type. You can then enter them in here. The next thing is to maintain the GL accounts. The GL account tables define the general ledger distribution for sales, vouchers, and GL transactions. They are default accounts, stockroom accounts, override accounts, and non-inventory. The default accounts of MAX define the distribution accounts for all MAX transactions. They are predefined acronyms. You access them by going to the Financial Integration module, selecting Activity, Maintain GL Accounts, Defaults. These are predefined debit-credit pairs used by MAX in creating financial transactions relating to purchasing, shop floor, inventory control, and sales. We'll run down the list of these so you can become familiar with them. They are accounts payable, accounts receivable, adjustment, commission expense, commissions payable, cost of sales, cycle count, discount account, foreign exchange accounts payable, foreign exchange accounts receivable, freight income account, indirect labor, freight expense, labor variance, labor applied, labor overhead variance, labor overhead applied, material variance, material overhead applied, miscellaneous income account, non-inventory purchase receipt, work in process scrap expense, purchase order receipt, purchase price variance, repetitive work in process, salary payable, sales account, subcontract purchase variance, staged raw material for subcontractors, subcontract receipts, material, variance, and scrapped, unplanned issue, unplanned receipt, work in process inventory account, and yield. Now every transaction in MAX has a specific transaction code. You can see them all listed here. Now let's look at the purchasing transactions. For PO receipts inventory, you have a debit of inventory and a credit to the purchase receipt account. For PO receipts non-inventory, we have a GL reference, which is an override, and then non-inventory receipts. For posting of vouchers for non-inventory, we go from non-inventory receipts to accounts payable. Purchase receipts goes to accounts payable. Then we have freight, tax, favorable purchase price variance, and unfavorable purchase price variance. For sales transactions, we have a shipment on a credit memo, a shipment on a customer order, and then post-sales orders for the product, discount, freight, tax, and commission. Let's look at the other financial transactions. We have stock adjustments, favorable or unfavorable, a receipt to stock, cycle count adjustments, favorable and unfavorable, issue from stock, receipt to stock, and transfers. Now to make this all work, we have to set up all the chart of accounts. We'll start with the default accounts. Now this is accessible through the Financial Integration module, Activity, Maintain GL Accounts, Defaults. Now if you're using Dynamics, the account description is pulled directly from Dynamics. To set up non-inventory receipts, select Maintain GL Accounts, Non-Inventory, and specify the account number. If you check the box, GL reference required, the MAX will enforce the use of a GL reference where it applies. Next is the setup of the override accounts. This associates a 3-character alphanumeric code to a general ledger account. These are used for non-inventory purchase orders, unplanned issues and receipts, and this is where the GL reference required is actually used. To set up the override accounts, go to the Financial Integration module, select Maintain GL Accounts, and then select Overrides. Next you need to set up the stockroom accounts. And what this does is it associates an inventory location to a general ledger account, normally an inventory account. The stock ID for the inventory location must exist in MAX in order for you to maintain this. To set this up, go to Financial Integration, Maintain GL Accounts, and select Stockroom. As you can see here, there's a Stockroom identifier browser, an account type code that you specify, and the GL account number. Understand here that if you use account type codes in conjunction with Stockroom GL accounts, this enables the same stockroom to handle multiple product groups. To quickly review this then, select Activity in Financial Integration, Maintain GL Accounts, select Defaults. If you browse this, you'll see that there's a full list of all the default GL accounts. You would specify an account type code, and you would enter in a GL account number. For the overrides, you would specify a 3-character code and a GL account number, and you can use the user-defined key and reference to enter additional descriptive data. Next, stockrooms. Stockrooms must be entered into MAX first. You can browse them here, make a selection, give it an account type code, and specify a GL account number. Lastly, for non-inventory, you can check the GL reference required here, specify your GL account number, and you'll see these references here. The next thing is to set up terms, currency, and ship via codes. In sales order processing, under Activity, SOP data SOP code data, you can enter in currency, ship via codes, and terms. Likewise, in purchasing control, they're maintained under activity, purchasing data, PO code data. So what you'll need to do is make sure that you set up your terms, currency, and ship via codes in both modules. Okay, now let's take a look at the overall business flow for accounting in MAX. Now here are the prerequisites. Before any meaningful accounting transactions can take place, you should have cost and lead times for purchased items, accurate bills of materials, accurate routings, and rolled up cost. The first activity impacting accounting will be the loading of on-hand inventory balances either manually or by cycle count or using auto load features that MAX provides. After that, you'll want to run an inventory valuation report. You could do this by going to the inventory control module and selecting reports and then selecting inventory value. The inventory valuation by stock ID can provide you additional data as well about the costing and the value of inventory. To run the From To Charge report, open the costing module, select Reports, From To Charge. Now you can see in our example dialog box below that the From To Charge report has several options. The most important one is the Update GL work file. If this is checked, then the From To Charge report will actually move the transactions to the General Ledger work file in preparation for posting to the General Ledger of the accounting system. You do not want to update until the account distribution has been verified. So do this: uncheck the box, run the From To Charge report for the date range, and verify everything first. Now you'll use this report to verify your opening inventory value. This report shows what will be posted to the GL by Stockroom GL account. At the bottom of the report is a summary. You can see the account number on the left, the total debit, total credit, net debit, and net credit. The last page of the report summarizes the transactions that will be posted. The entry of inventory balances creates an initial supply within the system. In order for the system, and MRP in particular, to operate effectively, demand now needs to be added. This can take one of three forms: customer orders, forecast orders, or master scheduled orders. Note here that shop orders also generate demand with a slightly different impact. Orders in MAX can be identified by their demand source, type, and their sequence number. Customer orders start with a 2, forecast orders start with a 1, master scheduled orders start with a 3, and shop orders start with a 5. Now, with the exception of prepaid customer orders, there is no accounting impact from the entry of demand orders. This holds true for shop orders only if no material has been issued and no operations have been completed through the shop. MRP calculates the demand requirements, compares what is required with what is available, and generates suggested planned orders to meet the shortfall. MRP also generates exception messages, as for example when a requirement falls within the lead time window. MRP generates planned orders for purchased items, part type code B, and also for manufactured items, part type code A. Purchase orders are created either by approving planned orders, or they can be generated manually. There is no accounting impact. Note here that the cash requirements report in the purchasing module indicates current and future cash commitments. Now, the receipt of a PO generates one of the following transactions: an inventory and purchase receipt, or a GL reference for non-inventory purchase receipts. The two credit accounts are purchase accrual accounts. PO receipts are performed in the inventory control module. To access this, you go to the inventory control module, select Activity, Transactions. When the window pops up, you'll see a series of tabs. The Receipt tab is used for purchase receipts. You can see here you can enter in the order number, the stock ID, the quantity, and the GL override if needed. When you run the From To Charge report, you'll see the receiving transaction. You can see here the account type code of A and a transaction type of R for receipt. Now, to perform a purchase accrual reconciliation, go to the Purchasing Control module, select Report, select Unposted Receipts Report. This includes anything vouchered but not yet posted. Select the options from the dialog box and run the report to review. Here's an example of the report. You can see the order number, the date of the receiver, the vendor and the vendor name, the part ID, the quantity received, the stock ID GL reference, the invoice cost, the extended cost, and the purchase price variance. Now, to voucher your PO receipts, you need to go into the Financial Integration module, select Activity, Vouchering. You can see an example here where we have a purchase order and a voucher number and all the detail on the screen. Once vouchering has been completed, you go into the Financial Integration module, Activity, Post, Vouchers. Running this program will post all the vouchers. You can review the report or the messages in the dialog box. Within the Post Voucher screen, you can select from a list. Clicking the Add button will give you a browser and allow you to select which vouchers you'd like to post. Once you've made your selection, click the Post button to actually post. You can review the exceptions by clicking the Report button. Once the batch has been produced, you can produce a detailed posting report. This will show you the MaxGL account number, the transaction date, the posting date, the max batch number, the max order numbers, and the debit and credit amounts. Now let's take a look on the manufacturing side. The majority of general ledger accounting transactions are created by activity in the following areas: inventory control, shop floor control, master scheduling, and costing. The post-order closure function must be performed in order for labor, material, and overhead variances to be posted. When shop orders are released, the next action after that is to pick the components and then to issue them. You issue shop orders in inventory control under the transaction tabs. You can review these in the From To Charge report as transaction code I. This shows that the material has been issued. Now, any of the transactions on these tabs creates an accounting transaction. Now, when processing a shop order, after components have been issued, posting operations through the shop creates another transaction. The progress of the order can be reviewed by going to the shop order and clicking on the Routing tab. You'll see in the bottom here, Quantity Completed. This gives an indication about where the shop order is in its processing. You can also review the quantity remaining. Once the shop order has been processed through the shop floor, it will need to be received to stock. That's done in the Receipt tab and then selecting from the drop-down Shop. These transactions too can be reviewed in the From To Charge report as quantity completed and quantity scrapped and the receipt to stock. Now, if you need to troubleshoot the costing transactions for shop orders, you have a number of ways to do this. One handy thing to do is to go into the Costing module under Inquiries and look at the order cost. This is a very detailed review of all costing for shop orders. Now, in order to post the variances, you must close the orders. That means you're going to move them from status 4 completed to status 5 closed. That's done under Post Order Closure in Costing. Open the Costing module, select Batch, Post Order Closure. You'll see here an example of those transactions: material variance, labor variance, and labor overhead variance and their associated transaction codes. Now let's look at shipping and invoicing. The shipping activity creates the detail for the invoice. Accounting should review the invoice edit list, which is a report in sales order processing, and make appropriate changes or corrections, and then post the invoices. Shipping is performed in the sales order processing module in the Ship Order screen. Once that's performed, you can run the invoice edit list in sales order processing. The invoice edit list will detail all the shipment transactions in all detail. Once that's been done, you can post the sales orders. The invoice date can be assigned here. The default is today's date. So in Financial Integration, select Activity, Post, Sales Orders. You'll receive a resulting sales order posting report. The invoice number and AR batch are created. Once you've posted the sales order, you can now print the invoices. Go into Financial Integration, Reports, Print Invoices, make the appropriate selections in the dialog box. Now once that's been done, you can review the posting detail. Note that inventory and cost of goods transactions will be posted through the GL stream. Okay, now let's learn about month-end procedures. The first thing you'll need to do is you'll need to determine the cutoff dates for each period. Process all inventory, shop, sales, and purchasing transactions. Run post-order closure to create the variances. Post all financial transactions and verify all your posting dates. Print closing reports, purge month-to-date, year-to-date data, and then start your next period. Okay, now let's take a look at what we've learned in this session. We learned about max cost configuration, how to develop standard cost, the components of costing, posting procedures, subcontracting, multiple costs, variances, journal entries, the overall business flow, and month-end procedures. Now keep in mind that you have a full documentation set in PDF files on your server when Max is installed. Also, if you gain access to the portal, there's a lot of information there that you can use and a lot more documentation. You can contact your customer advocate in order to get access to the customer portal, and also if you have questions, you can contact me. Thanks very much for attending, and we hope to see you in the next session.